The soldier returned after 6 years of service on the border, where the sound of gunfire and military orders had been the rhythm of daily life. But the real trigger wasn't on the battlefield. It was waiting for him on his doorstep in the form of an 8-year-old girl, his daughter. Emily stood motionless under the scorching sun, clutching a small suitcase and a worn-out teddy bear on the porch. His wife, who had once sworn to wait, screamed, "Get out!" At that moment, a silent earthquake occurred. It was as if a mine had been planted in his family during all those years he was away, and now it began to explode. "I told you, you don't belong here anymore. Get out!" Rachel stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped to the side, hands on her hips, her t-shirt disheveled, her hair in a messy bun, as if she had just woken up from a nap. In the midst of the unabating anger, down on the steps, Emily, the 8-year-old girl, stood with a small suitcase in her hand, clutching a worn-out teddy bear held together with a rubber band. The girl's eyes were dry, only her skin glistened with sweat, and there was a faint, dirty mark on her chin, as if she had stumbled and gotten up. From the window of the neighboring house, Mrs. Margie, the elderly neighbor, peered out from behind the curtains, sighed, but said nothing. It wasn't the first time she had seen this scene, but as always, she knew there was nothing she could do. "Get out, Rachel," she said sharply. "Try to enter this house again. I will close the door forever." Emily tightly gripped the handle of the suitcase, standing still. The sun began to set, casting her shadow on the ground, lonely and trembling, as if the sun was burning her delicate skin, and the shadow seemed scared. "Sorry." The girl's voice was so quiet that only she could hear it. She didn't beg, she didn't cry, and she didn't leave. She just stood, as if waiting for something other than the order thrown in her face. From the end of the dirt road, the sound of a car could be heard. Tires squealed on the dry gravel. An old pickup truck pulled up to the gate. The car door opened, and a tall man stepped out with a worn canvas bag and a dusty red army jacket on his shoulder. Jack Thompson stood there, stunned, as his eyes met the child, with the suitcase in front of the house, small shoulders, a familiar face, though a little longer and thinner, but the way Emily stood quietly and steadfastly broke his heart. "Emily," he called, and the girl looked up. That look, for a moment, seemed to crack and then immediately close, between joy and fear. Rachel flinched, quickly straightened up, smoothed her hair, and forced a smile, as if caught red-handed, unable to deny. "Oh, darling, you're back," she said. "Tease her. She always ruins everything," she chuckled dryly, not looking at her husband. Jack didn't answer. He slowly walked towards her. His calloused hand gently rested on his daughter's shoulder. Emily tensed for a second, then rested her head on his arm, as if by reflex. There were no tears, only a sense of security, as if a door had just opened slightly. Jack bent down and picked up the small suitcase. It was light as a feather. He knew exactly why all three entered the house. In the silent atmosphere, Rachel spoke first, as if defending herself. "You act like I'm a monster. Stubborn children need to be taught lessons." Emily followed her father, still clutching her worn-out teddy bear. The house had barely changed since he left. Still the same small hall, the old sofa, the landscape painting hanging crookedly on the wall. But something was already wrong. The air was dry, cold, and detached. Jack placed the suitcase next to the chair and threw his canvas bag on the floor. He looked up, and for the first time since entering the house, looked directly at Rachel. "We need to talk." Rachel froze, her lips tightened, then quickly nodded and went to the kitchen, trying to sound normal. "Let me make some coffee." The air in the house seemed to freeze after the door closed. Jack placed the canvas bag on the tiled floor and pulled his daughter's small suitcase to the corner of the room. Emily sat on the sofa, slightly hunched. The teddy bear was still clutched tightly on her lap. She didn't ask anything, and didn't express obvious joy. But her eyes were different, a little brighter when she looked at her father. From the kitchen, Rachel called out, trying to lighten her voice. "You came back without warning. I didn't have time to prepare anything." Jack didn't answer. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and quickly wiped the sweat and dust from his face. Rachel came out of the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of Jack and sat down on the opposite chair with her own cup, crossing her legs and smiling weakly. "You've lost weight. Your service must have been hard, right?" Jack nodded, not looking her in the eyes. He leaned over and adjusted the pillow on the backrest for Emily. The girl quietly said, "Thank you, Mom." Then she hugged her bear tighter. "How has Emily been doing lately?" he asked in a calm voice. Rachel placed her hand on the stove. "She's fine, a little stubborn, but all children at this age are like that." "Do you take her to school regularly?" Jack asked slowly. "Well, mostly when I'm not busy, and she can walk by herself. She's big now. She's not 3 years old." Jack clenched his hand, then released it. "The money I sent, is it still coming regularly?" "Yes." Rachel crossed her arms and turned away. "What do you mean by that? Do you think I take this money and spend it? Can't I support my child?" "I don't think anything. I'm trying to understand," he replied. She chuckled briefly and dryly. "Now you act like you care a lot, but you were gone for 6 years. Jack didn't answer immediately. He turned away from Rachel and looked at the stairs where Emily had disappeared. "My absence was a mistake," he said almost in a whisper. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "And what do you want now? To act like you're perfect?" Jack sighed. He knew he wouldn't get anything genuine from her now, but he didn't need to. What he saw, the child's face with a suitcase in the sun, instant noodle dinner, a box of broken pencils, spoke enough. He quietly said, "I'm not asking to blame you. I want to understand if there's anything you want to tell me honestly." Rachel was silent for a few seconds, then shook her head and turned away. "Nothing to say. Everything is still the same." Jack nodded, not looking her in the eyes. He leaned over and adjusted the pillow on the backrest for Emily. The girl quietly said, "Thank you, Mom." Then she hugged her bear tighter. In the silent atmosphere, dinner was served. Rachel cooked 3 packs of instant noodles and divided them equally into 3 plastic bowls. The small dining table stood by the window, where the curtains had faded from the sun, on one side, revealing the iron frame. Emily sat opposite her father, holding a spoon, picking up a little noodle, but eating very slowly, as if not wanting to make a sound. Jack brought her another glass of water and gently asked, "What kind of drawing are you learning to do now? Are you painting with watercolors, like last time?" Emily smiled slightly, but before she could answer, Rachel interjected mockingly. "She quit extra classes. She draws all sorts of nonsense instead of focusing on her studies. I told her that if she doesn't care about literacy, drawing won't get her anywhere," she said. Emily lowered her head. The spoon touched the plate, echoing softly. Jack glanced at his daughter, then at the blue stain on her sleeve. Obvious traces of colored pencils. He didn't ask anything else. After dinner, Rachel took the dishes to the sink and said, "I'm going upstairs to rest a bit. I have a headache." She went up the stairs, leaving them alone in the room, where cicadas chirped outside the window, and a clock ticked on the wall. Jack stood up and walked to the corner of the room where an old bookshelf stood. On the shelf was a plastic box of colored pencils. He picked it up and opened the lid. The pencils were short and thick. Some were broken in half. Some had worn down leads. At the bottom of the box was a crumpled drawing of a house with a red roof and a figure hugging a child. Emily walked over and quietly said, "Mom says I waste her money, so she doesn't let me buy new ones." Jack didn't answer immediately. He very slowly put the pencil back into the box, then straightened up. His eyes were still fixed on the old wooden table. A long silence. Finally, he said in a husky, quiet voice, "Colored pencils also became a reason for reproach." Emily didn't quite understand, but looked at her father. His eyes seemed lost somewhere far away, without anger, without accusations. Just something had collapsed in the heart of a man who had always considered himself a pillar and now had to accept that he wasn't there when it was needed most. Jack closed the lid of the box and put it on the shelf. He didn't say anything else, just leaned down and gently touched his daughter's head. The light in the living room was pale yellow, casting the shadows of the two onto the stained wall in the setting sun's light. That night, Jack spread a blanket on the sofa, lying with his face turned towards the back of the armchair. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, where small cracks had gradually spread over the years, resembling roots. Closer to midnight, the sound of small, bare feet echoed on the tiled floor. Emily stood beside the armchair, holding a thin blanket and her worn-out teddy bear. She was silent at first.
Jack quietly sat up, gently shaking the edge of the blanket. She crawled under it, froze for a moment, then quietly asked, "Can I sleep here with you, Dad?"
Jack nodded slightly. His arm gently encircled his daughter, as if not wanting to disturb the fragile spark within her. Outside, the sound of cicadas died down. Only the sound of the wind touching the eaves and the steady breathing of the child in her father's arms remained, for the first time in many months of calm. Jack lay still for a while, his eyes still open. Emily was already asleep. Her breathing rose and fell steadily beside him. She lay on her side, her arm casually resting on her father's stomach. Her head rested slightly on his shoulder, still smelling of sun and dust. In her sleep, she stirred once, then very softly whispered, as if unconsciously, as if calling an old place by name. Jack looked at the ceiling. His eyes were dry, but his chest was heavy. The light from the bedside lamp softly illuminated the girl's face, blurring with her breath. Outside, the sound of crickets from under the tree began to grow, and in the corner of the yard, the light sensor blinked a few times, then went out. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house suddenly changed. Not entirely calm, but calm enough to arouse suspicion. Rachel woke up earlier than usual, went to the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and prepared breakfast. The sound of the frying pan touching the stove, the smell of fried eggs filled the house. A familiar taste that Jack remembered from the first years of their life together, but now it seemed alien. She set 3 plates with fried eggs and toast, 2 cups of coffee, and a glass of milk for Emily. Then she called out, "You two, come to breakfast. Hurry, it's getting cold." Jack brought Emily from the living room to the dining table. Rachel sat, legs crossed, smiling brightly, as if nothing had happened last night. She tilted her head and asked her daughter in a sweet but sharp voice, "Did you sleep well? Did you have any pleasant dreams?" Emily nodded slightly, not daring to look her mother in the eyes. Her hands stirred the milk, her eyes darted to her father, as if seeking refuge. Jack pulled out a chair and sat opposite Rachel. He raised the cup of coffee to his lips, lightly touching the rim, but didn't drink. He looked at Rachel. Her face was beautiful, with sharp features that many men noticed. But today, her skin seemed a little gray. There were faint, dark circles under her eyes, and her movements were too artificial to be natural. Dinner passed with the sound of spoons clinking on plates. Jack ate slowly, Emily ate very slowly, and Rachel tried to keep the conversation going with meaningless stories and questions the girl didn't know how to answer. "Do you like your old school, or should Mom transfer you to another one?" Emily didn't answer. Jack gently placed his fork on his plate. His voice was deep. "The girl just got a stable ride. Let's leave everything as it is." Rachel was silent for a moment, then nodded. Her smile was short-lived. At noon, Jack took Emily to town. They stopped at a small bookstore under the shade of a fong tree, where wooden bookshelves and handwritten chalk price tags still stood. On the way back, they met Mr. Walter, a neighbor living in the block, a retired police officer. He was standing by the vegetable shop. Jack recognized him first. "Hello, Uncle Walter," he said. Mr. Walter looked carefully, then opened the car door and got out. His face was wrinkled, tanned, but his eyes were very bright. "Glad you're back, Jack," he said, looking at Emily. "The child will be better off." Jack thanked him, about to ask more, but Mr. Walter raised his hand, as if to stop the question. "I'm just a neighbor. I don't dare interfere in other people's business." With these words, he patted Jack on the shoulder and returned to his car, saying nothing more. In the afternoon, when Rachel left under the pretext of meeting friends for a few hours, Jack and Emily stayed home. While sifting through tangled stacks of drawings in his daughter's room, Jack found a crumpled card tucked under the bottom of a drawer. The card was pink, old, with a messy drawing of a birthday cake and an incorrectly written, "Happy Mother's Day." I love you forever. The corner of the card was torn. The heart drawn with a red crayon was crooked and crumpled, as if someone had folded it and thrown it into a corner. Jack picked it up and asked, "Did you draw this?" Emily nodded, then lowered her head. Her voice was quiet. "Mom said not to draw silly things that waste paper." Jack looked at the card again. His hand clenched slightly. This wasn't just a colorful piece of paper. It was the first time Emily had learned to love someone not with words. And it was also the first time that feeling was rejected not with a shout, but with indifference. In the evening, the sky drizzled lightly. Rachel hadn't returned home yet. Emily took 2 slices of bread, spread butter on them, and carefully brought them to her father at the table. "I can do it myself, Dad. Try it and tell me if it's delicious." Jack took a piece of bread, bit off a small corner, and nodded. Delicious. They ate in silence. Only the rain gently pattered against the window. A moment later he asked, "Does Mom go out like this often?" Emily looked up, hesitated, then nodded. "I think Mom sometimes goes out for a walk, and when I wake up, she's not there yet." Jack didn't ask any more questions. He brought her another cup of hot milk and placed it in front of her. Late at night, when Emily was asleep, Jack stood alone on the second-floor balcony. The wind carried the scent of damp grass, and the streetlights cast a pale orange glow on the wet road. He looked towards the city, where he could hear the distant hum of cars and blurred lights in the rain. These small sounds, once familiar and part of family life, now brought him a sense of emptiness. Jack knew that Rachel wasn't cruel, but her indifference, the repeated afternoon hours when she neglected the child, casual remarks, meetings with friends that lasted until morning, all of it could create a crack he couldn't mend with words. He gently squeezed his hand on the railing. It was time to do something, this time for his daughter. The small room at the end of the corridor still smelled musty. Jack opened the crooked wooden door and entered the room that had once been his study. He began to tidy up, pulling out a drawer where he saw a transparent plastic box with a faded label for MDK. The lid of the box was not tightly closed. Inside lay a pile of papers, blurred printed photos, and several unfinished letters, scattered as if someone had hastily shoved them in and forgotten them. Jack opened each sheet in turn. One letter was half-written in his handwriting. "My love, today I taught a group of recruits. They were noisy, but I thought of Emily. I don't know if she's been behaving well lately." He paused. The paper was folded in half with an old crease. Between the letters lay several drawings made with crayons, sheets from a school notebook. One of the drawings depicted 3 people holding hands under a blue sky. Jack immediately recognized Emily's handwriting, clumsy, out of proportion, but enough to understand that the child had once tried to draw a family she wasn't sure she lived in. Another drawing showed a red truck. Next to it, a man in a hat, perhaps him, carrying a curly-haired girl. In the corner of the drawing was a scribble meaning Daddy. "When Daddy comes home, I'll give this to him." Jack didn't remember ever receiving these drawings. Perhaps they were never sent. Perhaps Emily hid them in her mother's room and they were thrown away. He carefully folded the drawing again, as if folding something unsaid. That day, Jack took Emily outside. They drove along dirt roads to the edge of the forest, where a shallow lake was due to the dry season. They sat on a rock and ate the sandwiches they had brought. The trees swayed gently in the wind. The sky was clear, and the sunlight was soft. Emily sat next to her father, at first a little awkward, playing with the crust of her bread. But when asked about school, she began to talk incessantly about a classmate, a math test, and the day she had to walk home alone because her mother was busy with guests. Jack listened in silence, not interrupting or asking why. He simply gently placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder and said, "I'm sorry I left you alone all this time." Emily looked up, squinting at the sun, nodded, then smiled a little, a genuine smile. "Now you won't have to walk alone anymore," Jack said, looking into the distance. Late in the evening, when they returned, it was already dark. There was no light on in the house. The front door was ajar. Rachel was in the living room. Seeing them, she immediately stood up. Her voice was high-pitched. "Where did you go? I called several times and you didn't answer." We were just walking, Jack replied, putting down his bag. His voice was calm. Rachel crossed her arms over her chest, not hiding her anger. You were going to take her without saying a word to me. You act like I'm not her mother. I just wanted us to spend some time together, Jack said. We were just walking, eating sandwiches, and looking at the sky. Rachel turned to Emily and sharply said, You didn't even bother to say a word to your mother. Emily stepped back, avoiding her mother's gaze. Jack intervened. Do you really care so much about the girl? Then do you know about her health and her school studies? Rachel laughed sarcastically, then turned and went up the stairs. The sound of her footsteps echoed hollowly up the stairs, as if trying to attract someone's attention. In the following days, Rachel suddenly changed. She began to clean the house, wash the floors and curtains, prepare dinner on time, ask Emily about her studies, and even pack her lunch for school. But in Jack's eyes, something seemed unnatural. Rachel avoided looking her daughter in the eyes when she spoke, her voice too light, too even, as if she were reading from a script. Every time she asked Emily something, her eyes briefly flickered to Jack, as if checking his reaction. In the evening, she often finished eating early and said she was going out for a short while, justifying it by needing to meet friends and relax. The atmosphere was stifling. When she returned home, Rachel wasn't drunk, but her breath smelled of wine and her eyes were red. Jack said nothing, but inwardly, two worlds were drifting further and further apart. One where Emily was starting to smile again, and another where the mother was drifting further away, unaware of what she was losing. In the morning, the sky was clear, but the wind was dry. The bright golden sun covered the treetops behind the house. Jack sat alone in his old study. The phone was pressed to his ear. His left hand held a pen, lightly tapping the edge of the table in time with the operators waiting. The call was finally transferred. Hello, Mr. Thompson? Yes. Your joint account with your spouse is working normally. Transactions occur regularly every month. How can I help? Jack softly asked. I want to check if my monthly transfer is being accounted for correctly. Yes, everything is in order. All transfers are successfully processed from the military account to the family account. The operator's voice was polite, cold, precise, without suspicion, if judged only by the system. But the account is almost empty, Jack asked again. Yes, cash withdrawals, terminal payments, small expenses every week. Do you want a detailed statement? Jack nodded, though the person on the other end didn't see him. Yes, please send a full printed report for the last 3 years to my home address. He hung up and placed the phone on the table in front of him. There was a blank sheet of paper and a pen still full of ink, but he wrote nothing. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emily was reading a book in her room, and Jack went to open the door. Standing on the doorstep was a woman with light curly hair and thin-rimmed glasses. Megan Alice, Emily's former teacher. Hello, Jack, she smiled. I heard you were back. Jack invited her in. Emily heard her old teacher's voice and happily ran out, hugging her. Megan sat down, opened her bag, and took out a stack of old books, notebooks, and some comic books. I saved these for you, she said, gently stroking Emily's head. I thought you'd come back for them someday. Emily sat nearby, her eyes glued to the comic books. A moment later, Jack led her to her room, leaving the adults alone. Megan lowered her voice when Emily left. I used to worry about her, she said. But no one was sure then. She never complained. She was just quiet. The unfinished piece of food remained untouched, but I'm not done yet. This won't end so easily. It's up to you, Jack replied wearily. Then he stood up and went to Emily's room. Downstairs, Rachel was still sitting alone in the kitchen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The divorce papers were still on the table. Not even a gentle breeze could turn them over. The divorce hearing took place 3 weeks later in a small district courtroom. Jack was neatly dressed. He brought all his documents, copies of bank statements, letters written by Emily, confirmations from Megan, and some neighbors who had seen Emily wandering alone after school or standing crying behind the schoolyard on days Rachel didn't pick her up. Rachel entered the room in a tight black dress. Her hair was pulled back high. Her face was heavily made up. Her eyes no longer avoided his gaze, but sparkled with tension. He left for 6 years, wasn't home for a single day, and now he wants to be a good father, Rachel almost screamed in court. My girl, He's just playing a role. He wants to steal my child to humiliate me." Jack's lawyer calmly presented detailed documents, the full amount of stable monthly allowance, most of which was withdrawn for personal expenses, footage from school cameras showing Emily walking alone for many days, messages from Megan that Rachel didn't respond to. When the last witness, Mr. Walter, the neighbor, took the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom became almost tense. "I'm not interfering," he said slowly, "but I heard the girl crying in the yard when her mother and friends were playing music and drinking." The verdict was announced at the end of the day. Full custody of Emily was granted to Jack Thompson. Rachel received no compensation. The court encouraged her to maintain conditional visitation rights. At the moment the judge struck the gavel, Rachel jumped up, rushing towards Jack and Emily, who were sitting below, like a small hurricane. "Emily, you're not going anywhere. You're mine." Her voice trembled. Panic resonated in her words. 2 guards struggled to restrain her. Rachel fought, her hair disheveled, her face contorted with anger, confusion, and despair, or all at once. Emily fearfully stepped back, clutching Jack's hand. "Mom, don't be like that," the girl whispered. Jack bent down and hugged her tightly. "It's okay, Daddy's here." Rachel fell to the floor. Her hand was still outstretched, as if trying to hold on to something that had been taken from her forever. Silence fell in the courtroom. No one said anything else. Finally, a police officer gently led Rachel out of the room, and Emily buried her face in her father's chest, where for the first time she felt truly safe. That morning, the sky was clear. Jack didn't bring many things, just a suitcase with clothes, a few bags with Emily's books and drawing supplies, carefully wrapped in soft fabric. In the car, they barely spoke. Emily sat in the back seat, hugging her teddy bear and an empty notebook. When the car stopped in front of the white iron gate, Margaret Thompson was already standing there. She was in a floral dress, with her gray hair neatly tied back, and a gentle smile. When she saw Emily get out of the car, she didn't ask or say anything. She just opened her arms. "Come here, my dear granddaughter." Emily hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, and her grandmother's embrace was tender and slow, as if someone was returning a memory. She leaned down and whispered, "Here, you can draw as much as you want." The wooden house in Ashwell had a backyard planted with lavender, a small kitchen that always smelled of fresh bread, and a beautiful room dedicated to Emily. In the room, Jack rearranged the old desk, hung a new drawing board, and attached a wooden plaque with the inscription, "M's Corner," on the wall. Emily didn't talk much, but every day she drew more and more. Eaves, windows, birds. One day she drew hands reaching for the sky, only hands without faces. When her grandmother asked who they were, she replied, "They are people who don't speak, but always wait for me." The new school was smaller and quieter. The homeroom teacher was a person with a very warm voice who often bent down to the students' eye level when speaking. The classmates were not noisy. Some invited Emily to play with blocks, shared snacks during breaks. Although she was still shy, she no longer hid in the corner of the schoolyard, as she had in the old school. The teacher discovered that Emily had a talent for drawing and encouraged her to join the art club. Emily agreed without hesitation. Jack also started a new job, working as a guide at the city community center, teaching teenagers life skills, first aid, and career guidance. Every morning they prepared breakfast together. One fried eggs, the other spread butter. Then they sat next to each other and ate in quiet silence, sometimes interrupting with short stories about the neighbor's cat or a flat bicycle tire. Nothing special, but for Jack, it was the happiness he once thought he had missed. On weekends, they repainted the fence in the yard together. Emily painted a light blue section and said, "I want this place to be a sea corner." Jack smiled and added a blue section next to it. In the evening, he taught her how to fold clothes and hang pictures on the wall. The girl hung a new picture, a small house with smoke coming out of the chimney. In front of it were 3 shadows, but only 2 were standing nearby. The third had its back turned. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Rachel moved out of the old house, which had once been a home, then became empty, and finally, a monument to what could not be saved. She moved into a temporary apartment in an old neighborhood above an abandoned bakery. The room was small, with a low ceiling. The paint was peeling in places, the window was stuck and wouldn't open, letting only wind through the cracks. For the first time in many years, Rachel had to take care of herself, go shopping, do laundry, cook, although most dinners consisted of instant noodles or fried eggs. She tried calling several old friends, those who used to sit with her late into the night, who laughed when Emily cried in the next room. The message? I need help. I'm not okay. No one answered. Some read and didn't reply. Some set their status to do not disturb. One person briefly wrote, "We are no longer close." Rachel sat in the dark with her phone in her hands. There was no one else to call. One afternoon, she walked through the park, where she had once promised Emily to take her to play, but missed the appointment. On a sunny day, a child stood leaning against a tree, holding balloons and waiting for the evening. Rachel sat on an old stone bench and watched the children playing on the slide. A little girl fell, cried, and was immediately picked up and comforted by her mother. She watched for a long time, then returned to her apartment. Rachel opened a drawer and took out a letter that Emily had sent and that the court had returned to her after the process. I think you also need someone like Dad was for me. I'm not angry, I'm just a little sad, but that's okay. She read the letter over and over again. Her hands trembled, her lips tightened, and then she burst into tears like a child. The late tears of a person who had lost everything, not as turbulent as when she was denied custody, but slow, quiet, deep, as if someone had untied a very old knot in her heart. She didn't know who to apologize to, and wasn't sure if she still deserved to be a mother.